I'm going to take you into this interesting subject about spirit of place, and I'm going to start off with a couple of stories. A mum story and a dad story, because I used to be a psychiatrist, which means life histories are very important. So we'll start off. When I was 8, my mum gave me a book, Oxford University Press. It was one of those sort of educational books called The Map That Came to Life. You opened the book up and it described a brother and a sister going for a walk from where they were staying with a relative, and they were going through the countryside to visit an aunt to have tea in a little village. And as you turned over each page, you saw a different map and you saw pictures of them, and the map came to life. And I became mad about maps ever after, and I still am. My wife calls me Map Man and all that kind of thing. And but I just put that in because the map that came to life is really a theme in my life. So I share that. Thank you, Mum. She's still alive, nearly 96. And then I have to tell you a story about my dad. Now, at the same time, because I was about 8 then, my dad and I, this was the 1950s, we didn't have central heating, this is Britain in the 1950s, we had coal fires, we went to the coal place to cut some coal with our axes and a torch in the dark light, and as we broke the coal, my dad and I, the coal split open, and there was an incredible shaft of gold, like this. Actually, really, like this. This. And my dad said to me, "What do you think that is, Anthony?" And I said, he was incidentally a nuclear physicist, just to say. So my dad said to me, "What do you think that is, Anthony?" Always educational. And I said, "Oh, looks like gold, Dad." He said, "Well, it's not actually gold, it's fool's gold and parites." And there I just put some up for you to remind you what it looks like. It's for sale outside. There's a stall selling it if you badly need this stuff. So I said, "Oh, right, that's interesting." And then he said, "But I want to tell you a story. My dad told me in the 1930s." So this is oral tradition. This is oral tradition now. And my dad and I, in the 1930s, were breaking coal in our coal place in just the same way. And he told me a story as the coal broke open. And he told me about a lady in the United States of America who, just before the turn of the century, broke open a piece of coal in her coal place. And when she broke it open, she found a gold chain in the coal. And when she tried to pull the gold chain from the coal, it was stuck in the coal and wouldn't come out. So that meant that it was actually in the coal. "Wow," I said, Dad, being a precocious little boy. I said, "How old was the coal?" And he made a really good guess because we were cutting Northumbrian coal and he knew that was 39 million years old. So he said to me, 39 million years old. So I said, "Wow," and that set me into a seed. I'd already become map man, but now I was going to be a hunter of anomalies. Strange things. I really wanted to know, how had that gold chain got into the coal? Fast forward. And about 15 years ago, in a marvelous book called Forbidden Archaeology, sort of thing you're not allowed to read, but I've got to read, I found the actual report of Mrs. Culp in Illinois in 1891, who did exactly what my dad's dad through me, and I'm now told you, exactly the same. There was the gold chain. It disappeared out of the family in 1959. It's gone without trace. Nobody knows where it is now. But the point is the coal actually had the gold in it. How did it got there? Well, we don't know, except it wasn't 39 million years old. It was 260 to 320 million years old. So we can tell these kind of stories at crop circle conferences because that's the kind of thing that we're really interested in. So I'm interested in anomalies. So to chase up anomalies, I had to become a psychiatrist because you're all anomalies and I wanted to study you. And I wanted to find out what kind of person never mind. And I retired and gave all that up over 10 years ago and got back into my real passion, which was landscape. And I'm interested particularly in landscape zodiacs, as some of you know, you've heard me talk about them before. And the idea of, well, what is it that kind of generates a landscape zodiac? how do effigies of the zodiacal signs appear in the countryside? How do they get there? Well, you know, and all this. And I'm now doing academic research into this. And that leads me to the idea that the earth somehow or other sings, that we can talk about a song of the earth. And that leads me to the idea of the spirit of place, which is what I'm really going to be looking at today. And that inevitably takes me to crop circles. Dashing through, the earth sings in, you know, many different ways. But just before we look at crop circles for the rest of this talk, I just want to remind you about the rest. Because I'm interested in anomalies. I'm not narrow-minded and just look at crop circles. I want to look at the rest. So let's just have a look at them quickly. Go through them because I know you're going to hear about some of these things later on. First of all, just to make sure, if you really want to know all about the evidence about crop circles, read Janet Osborne's absolutely brilliant book. It's the thing to give your skeptical neighbor for Christmas who just doesn't believe in it and thinks it's all hoaxing or whatever ridiculous business it is. This is the book, so I get that out of the way. That's the end of the crop circles. Ice circles. I'm just going to show you the images. I'm not going to explain them, but they are just like crop circles. And they're very beautiful. And they tend to be recorded in places where there's lots of ice, which could be tomorrow in this climate. And then there are snow circles. This is from the Netherlands. And they are quite extraordinary. There's no footprints. They're just there. And they have kind of markings. If you drop a piece of snow into this soft snow that's been dug out by some incredible force, it just makes a little mark. There's no footprints, no boards, no planks. And that's the shape of it. Don't ask me why. 60 meters in size. And then after the snow's gone, you can see the grass, and it's being kind of swirled underneath with a lei, very like a crop circle. Fascinating. But we just haven't seen many of them, but they're important to know about. And then there are these. Aha. This is where thousands of little elves have been running around in the woods. Except this was in a Gloucestershire wood. This appeared in the Spiral magazine a couple of years ago. I mean, no footprints. Here's, you know, you can imagine walking into a wood in Gloucestershire a couple of years ago, and there it is. Wow. But don't worry, they appear in Russia as well. I don't know how they're done. They're an anomaly. They fascinate me. There's no footprints. Well, there's some people being along here walking through, but we just don't know much about them and how it's all happening. But just widen yourself just to not think about crop circles. Sand circles. I used to have some lovely photographs of sand circles from Egypt, but I've actually not got them on my computer anymore. But there's one sand circle, and there's not a very good one here. Very similar to the things in the woods in Russia. Fascinating. What are these things? How are they formed? And then of Janet Osborne's extraordinarily good website, Her Own Story, which is marvelous. She woke up one morning and went out into the National Forest Park, which is just behind or nearby her house in Holland, and she found 3 tree circles. The biggest one was 100 meters in diameter, with all the trees bent into the middle. She'd heard of them before, and indeed I had. I'd seen a picture of one in Canada from the early 90s. There they are, just bent, not broken, just like corn, exactly the same, except these are big deciduous trees. And huge, at the 100 meters wide. And they all had a center, and she was very impressed by that. So she said, I must ring up the forest authorities and find out what they know about this. So she rang them up, and they didn't know about it, really. And they said, we'll look into it, and we'll get back to you. So they never really did. And she went back, she went and had another look, and just in detail, this big tree bent over with new growth already coming out, just like a crop stem, exactly the same. And then about 3 weeks later, she went back into the woods and had a look, and they'd all been cut down. And as she says, probably to make sure that nobody else could pick up this anomaly and have any worries about it or question it in any kind of way. And then you say to me, well, what about the Swiss cheese you mentioned in that list at the beginning? Well, when the Stereologist magazine first started to come out in the 1980s, and the crop circle thing was really just getting going in the very early days, In Switzerland, these holes appeared in the ground, suddenly. 60 or 70 foot in diameter with sharp edges, 60 foot deep, no sign of soil anywhere, just like a Swiss cheese hole. And they were reported in the Cereologist magazine. No joke, I never got a photograph of one. I've never heard about them since. But they were happening in Switzerland. So Switzerland was getting Swiss cheese holes. You don't believe me, do you? Look in your faces. You don't believe me. You think I'm mad. I know what mad people look like. Right. Okay, back to business. Spirit of place. I'm going to look at these various things. Simulacra, genius loci, earth spirit, and song lines. Just to sort of get into the whole business of how does the landscape express itself. Let's start off with simulacrum, or simulacra in plural. Really, it just means nothing else but a painting, a representation of people. That's a simulacra. But when John Michel, that extraordinary writer and sage, really, of all these things mystical and mysterious in the landscape over the last 40 years, sadly not with us anymore, when he wrote a book about all those strange things in trees and plants and faces and images that you see, he actually coined the word simulacra to describe this phenomenon. And his favorite one, and one of my favorite ones, is this. In the 5th century, in Armenia, Bishop Vartan led a Christian army against the invading Persians. The army and Bishop Vartan were wiped out. It was a terrible massacre. The remnants of Christian people the next week crept down the gorge where the battle had taken place, and there was the bishop, sanctified, and still there, photographed in the 1950s. A really spectacular simulacra, or simulacrum, really. And John wrote about these things. He says, as you gaze, images come into focus, gods, demons, tortured souls, creatures of mythology and potential life forms of the future. They are diverse and fluctuating, but in every landscape they're somehow unified, as if they were products of the same dream. It's as if the land somehow or other characterized the same kind of faces in that landscape. Native North American faces in a Native North American landscape, Chinese faces in an Eastern Chinese landscape, Egyptian faces in an Egyptian landscape, and so on. You've probably noticed this. And this lovely picture by an artist, John Craxton, who was very influenced by the British landscape and the spirit of place, he has this beautiful painting which is called Dreamer in a Landscape. I just put that in there because John then answers the question, who then is the dreamer? He says, well, the answer, simple answer is it's the imaginative person who sees them, of course, you know, people with just big imaginations. That's the sensible answer, but not quite the final one. We're certainly inclined to perceive patterns and symbols in nature, but equally, nature has a tendency to manifest such patterns, the same ones, repeatedly. I thought that really profoundly affected me when I read it way back. There's one of those Canadian ones photographed by one of my wife's daughters. Look at the face here, looking towards the Rocky Mountains in Alberta. Fantastic Indian face. Couldn't be anything else, could it? It's just mind-blowing. Oh, this is just to remind you that Peter Knight's got a tour tomorrow at 12, between 12 and 2. It's going to be brilliant. He's there. I did check that it was all right to show this picture before. Why am I showing it him? Because the lady of the stone here, you put a big bubble up here and you feel what she's saying about Peter's presentation. There he goes again. Sorry. And from the Red Sea, this fantastic fish tail. A tail of a fish. And there are the Arab letters in the fish's tail. It's from an Arab place. There is no God but God. How does it happen? How does this phenomenon happen? Is it sheer chance? Chance? Of course it's not. The angels, you know, they're writing on fish tails. And my favorite, this is a small piece of mica rock, which has been sliced. It's about so big. Comes from West Africa. Look at it. It's just about got buses on it. It's certainly got birds, planes, people, trees, fighting, castles. It's just a hunk of rock. Probably 239 million years old. No gold chains in this one, but what's going on? That's what I'm really interested in. And I'm reminded a little bit of a thought here. We do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. So we are profoundly involved. We, our consciousness, is profoundly involved in this process. Okay, genius loci. Genius just means spirit. So if you call somebody you know who's very clever a genius, you've got it all wrong. He's a spirit, not a genius. Well, you know what I mean. Okay. In classical Greece and Rome, and here's a Roman altar with a dedication to Jupiter, Optimus, Maximus, et, and the genia loci, the genius of the place. They really believed in the idea that each place had its own spirit, its own genius. And this genius affected everything in that environment. Absolutely everything. The shape of people's faces, the way they walked, not just simply accents and speech, but absolutely everything. They really believed that this was a sort of tutelary God energy which affected everything. And quite honestly, you know, like I used to live in Newcastle, and I could tell the difference between Newcastle people and Gateshead people on the other side of the river, south of the Tyne, just by walking across the river. And, you know, the classical teachers would say that is genius loci. When you had these goddesses or gods of the local area, they often held a cornucopia, bursting out with all the fruits of the world. So this genius loci had tremendous power and strength. This lady is called Rosmerta, next to a kind of Gaulish Mercury. Another one from Northumberland, my sort of native county, is called Coventina. Coventina as well. It's a triple goddess. You can see the maiden here, short hair, rather slim waist. Then she becomes the mother, slightly bulged out a little bit through having children. And then the old lady at the end, the crone. The triple goddess in the traditional way, and she's holding the cornucopia. It's interesting how the cornucopia sits with the crone, the elder, who's got all the knowledge and all the gifts to give back. I love that picture. I think it's really wonderful. Classical writers like Plotinus from the 3rd century, you know, just make the point. I won't read it all out. You can see it for yourself. It's just the richness of this idea that it actually permeates absolutely everything. And here's Proclus, a century or two later, saying that even if you move from one place to another, your face begins to change, your children will look different. And this wasn't just sort of genetics and sunburn. For them, it was something much deeper going on. The spirit of place inculcated absolutely everything that was going on. So, you know, oh, I forgot about Homer. Because Homer's always got something to say about this. Homer is so wise. Homer is just about the first down written poet. So what has Homer to say about the landscape? If you ask kids today, who is Homer? It's like saying, who is Churchill? It's that dog on the back seat of the car. You've seen them. Terrible. Never mind. We won't go on about this. Get back to the story. Shakespeare, he was aware of this incredible force in nature. And I mean, he explored that beautifully, didn't he, in A Midsummer Night's Dream? Such a magical interface of fairy and reality, all in a kind of mysterious wood, all carried out with, at the time of the midsummer. Quite magical, absolutely magical. Less magical, but still equally interesting in As You Like It. The Duke has taken the court into the woods, partly for safety, and while he's there, he proclaims, and this is a very classic quote, and he's away now out of the hurly-burly of the town, and this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. I would not change it. I think that's a fantastic quote. I mean, Shakespeare is just telling us that the land carries information. You have to perhaps go to the middle of a wood to get there. But anyway, there we are. And Jung, calling the spirit of place spiritus loci, he was very, very affected in the same kind of way when he went to America by the way that there was this totality, this spirit, which seemed to deal and affect the whole and all the different qualities of the American people. And to come forward in time to Jeremy Nadler. Jeremy Nadler is a philosopher, a PhD in Egyptology, an anthroposophist, and also a gardener, a remarkable Renaissance man, really, and a very, very, very thoughtful writer. And he's written a beautiful book, which I recommend to you, recently came out, Florist Books, Gardening as a Sacred Art. Because I think gardeners, of all people, are close to the land. I don't mean just talking to plants, which I'm all for. I'm just talking about the way they know their gardens. Rather than the gardener feeling that he or she is the creator of the garden, it is possible to reach the experience that the garden is composing itself through the gardener's awareness of what needs to be done in the garden. This presupposes an attunement of the gardener's imagination to the spirit and spirits of the place, which seeks through the gardener to become ever more fully alive and present, immanent, alive in the garden. And so the garden, as a work of art, results from a dialogue between the gardener and the spirit, perhaps one could well say soul of the garden, which is seeking to attain a fuller expression. Spirit of place in your own back garden. Wow, I think that's very profound. Just leave it there and go on to songlines. Well, many of you read Bruce Chapman's book, or the late Bruce Chapman's book in 1987, and came for the first time across his view of what songlines were, which was a bit simplified and not entirely accurate. But you know that in Australia there is this incredible dream time concept, which we just can't put our head around. It isn't just about people walking through the country, singing literally at every rock and thing so they remember like a sort of mental map. It isn't like that at all. It's a profound interaction between person, sky, heaven, earth, ancestors, animals, birds, stones, everything, in one complete totality of interaction. So when you're born as a baby, you're immediately attached to a totem of some form or other who is part of a dream time, part of a songline, and that will affect you through your whole life. It's a complete interdimensional, polydimensional concept which anthropologists find very, very difficult. They have one word. I've got a lovely picture first. Here are some Aborigines sitting schematically, looking at the Milky Way here. This is one of their diagrams. And then they have the four quarters, the cardinal signs on this beautiful painting. And underneath, a more Western artist, but still of Aboriginal background, has tried to draw the idea of the walk across the countryside with Uluru there, Ayers Rock for some of you, and then all the totemic animals. And there's actually one animal here escaping out of a bag, and in the bag are all the stories that are all the aspects of the dream time. And this is not in any kind of way in any time now. It's all time, all the time. It's quite extraordinary. And the only word that you can bring to describe what this thing is that they're in is cosmoscape. That's the best translation that anthropologists can produce for this songlines, dream time kind of concept, and I love that word. Now, it's a challenge. We don't have anything like that in our culture. We just do not. And yet, Bob Trubshaw, who is the boss of Heart of Albion Press and a very thoughtful man who's written many books about Earth mysteries and published many other authors about Earth mysteries in the British landscape, he's just come out of retirement in terms of a writer and recently written this beautiful book, which is for sale at the moment. I don't know, it's upstairs, Singing Up the Country, the Songlines of Avebury and Beyond. I really recommend this book. Read it because everything about our English-British history going right back to the ancient Britons and before then, in the context of Avebury, the stones and everything you've been hearing about from people like Nick Mann and so on, it's all in there. And he's really trying to create this idea of songlines in the British landscape, and not in an affected, precious way, a very affecting way. And the word that he uses is mindscape. He's trying to create a mindscape, the landscape and the mind being sort of together. And that leads us on to another concept, which is receiving more academic interest, and that's the idea of enchantment. A lovely word, enchantment. It doesn't just mean you've been hexed, put into a magic spell. It means you are living within a song. And look how many people have emphasized vibration and music and gongs, and John's lovely presentation that we've just heard, this importance of sensing your own octave, sensing your own vibration, sensing that we are just living in a tone all the time, living within a song. And this is a word which has got taken up beautifully in this book by Peter Woodcock, which you can get from Gothic Image. And in it, he, as an artist, Peter Woodcock's an artist, he looks at the whole British neo-romantic vision, from William Blake right through to people like Jarman, the filmmaker, and recent artists in the last 20 years, Paul Nash and Michael Ayrton, and filmmakers and documentary makers, all of whom are affected by the British countryside, the British kind of spirit of place. And on the back of the book it says, does the spirit of place still exist in our culture? Or have we lost our spiritual heritage to the conglomeration of market forces and corporate art? Quietly, out of the mainstream hype, artists are exploring this idea. And, you know, it's just a beautiful book. This picture by Michael Ayrton called Winter Stream. There are the downs. There are the chalk downs. You know, you could be literally looking up at the White Horse at Alton Barnes here. Here is a winter stream, quite a strange energy. And rising up nearby is this tree trunk, which is almost animated. It's almost got a kind of energy. It's almost a simulacra. And he's trying to catch the spirit of the land in this image. And Peter Woodcock himself photographs that same old lady who Peter Knight has stared at from time to time in Avebury. She's got a lot to answer for, this lady. But nonetheless, what an appealing and attractive stone that is. How many photographers have tried to catch what that stone is carrying? Now, a piece of personal enchantment. Another piece of autobiography. When Celia and I first came into contact with each other, my wife, Celia, that is, she and I were living 7,500 miles apart. She was in Canada, I was in England. And I have to say, this is an immensely personal thing to say, but we'd never actually physically touched. And so we began what was called traditional courtship. I wrote letters. There were no faxes and emails and, you know, phones that you could quickly get in contact with and all the rest of it, and no Skypes and all that. This was just hard graft, writing letters. So we wrote letters to each other. They took 2 minutes to get from England to Canada and about a fortnight to get from Canada to England, because we've got a much better postal service. Anyway, at the bottom of our letters, we each, quite independently and separately, put a little symbol of love. I put a candle flame, and Celia put a round circle with a cross, which she still puts on her carvings now as her personal symbol. Anyway, eventually, I landed from a small airport in Canada, and I was met by this lady whom I'd never touched before, and we embraced, and it sounded and felt all right. So immediately she dragged me off to a cave. 20 minutes from the airport. I never lie in these presentations. And she dragged me off to a cave, and I'm not going to talk about what happened in the cave. Modesty. But when we came out of the cave, I looked up at the rock nearby, and what I saw was this. 900 or 1,000 years old. Neither of us had ever seen these before. They're not in the guidebooks. Nobody knows about them. Here was a man and a woman. You can tell it's a man because there's a little thing hanging down here. A plant looking at the earth. You know what that means now. And a sort of divine child here beside them with their sun ray hats. These aren't feathers because the local natives don't wear feathers in their heads and that. These are sort of rays coming off. So there's a man and a woman here, but as you can see, there is Celia's symbol and there is mine on the rock from 900 years before we started these conversations. So just echoing what Bert was saying last night, time is a very strange thing in the enchanted landscape. And we went on to come together, get married, and we do these walks and things, and this is our website, Earth Sky Walk, if you want to find out more about us. And then we got very interested here, back in England, in sacred landscape, and we were asked by the Gaia Foundation to write a report, an inquiry into sacred landscape, and we wrote a very, very powerful report, which we're very proud of. It went to the United Nations, and it's actually incorporated in the United Nations thinking, the whole business of how you protect sacred sites all over the world. Everything, from international law to local community work. We put it all into this incredible report we wrote. And we defined what sacred landscape was, and that's become an academic definition, which is now used by academics all over the place. Big-headed stuff, this, really. But anyway, I am an academic as well. I've made this joke before. That's why I've got pens in my top pocket. Yeah, you've heard all that before. But get back to the crop circles. When we look at this landscape, Glastonbury here we are at Marlborough, Silbury Hill, Stonehenge down here. Here are crop circles distributed in this area. This is a sacred landscape in an incredibly powerful way. And it's just impossible to escape the idea which you heard birds say and other people say all through this weekend so far. We're living in one of the most incredibly rich sacred landscapes in the world. In fact, Colin Renfrew, the archaeologist, has said the whole of South England in this area is one vast sacred landscape. Of course, if you look at crop circles, you say, well, they're distributed, approximately along the chalk lands where there are these deep aquifers. We were hearing that from Jim Lyons yesterday. Not incorrect, but I want to bring up another kind of landscape. This is a more energetic landscape. I'm not going to go into any detail about this. I could talk about it for a whole hour. But this is a landscape temple, the Wessex landscape temple. It's a chakric temple. It actually reflects the whole story of King Alfred, from Athelney here to the battle at Edington, where English language was born when he defeated Guthrum. But the interesting thing about this root to crown landscape temple, chakric temple, is that it has a huge third eye. And we were hearing from Jim yesterday about the significance of the third eye and its importance. And this third eye has in the centre of it a place called Scales Bridge. We're here in Marlborough now, Avebury here. And this third eye area is the area which has 90% of the English crop circles. And that's really very interesting. Let's have a look at this temple in another way. You can just see it there. So you see I've put the chakras out. It's not a very good map, this, but you can see this huge third eye chakra. And if we look at what the characteristics of the third eye are, at least according to Ruth White, who I have a lot of time for her book, Working with Chakras, this isn't a psychic thing. This is a more kind of thoughtful approach, I think, than just simply a psychism. It's associated with beauty. These are her 4 characteristics of the third eye. Sacred geometry and forms. She doesn't say stone circles, and she's not talking about Wiltshire. I'm adding these bits. Crop circles, beauty, justice, balance. The centre of this circle is at a place called Scales Bridge. The MOD on Salisbury Plain, which some of you get a bit sniffy about, is actually guarding us, providing the balance and our security. And also it ensures that thousands of acres are kept free of us and the wildlife has a wonderful time. Guardianship, well, it's back to the MOD and the whole idea of sovereignty of the land. I can do a separate workshop showing how kings and queens of England are related to this part of England in a way that you'd be staggered to hear about. But our whole kind of royal line is actually centered very much in this circle area. And finally, transformation. She says in her book, future insights, form and consciousness start here. Crop circles. I think that's just fascinating to see that. And also, this circle is not just a circle, it's a landscape zodiac. I've actually put, it's not a zodiac where you see effigies of the animals. I looked for them with colleagues for 10 years. We were looking for Leos and bulls and all this sort of stuff, like the Glastonbury zodiac. We never found them. But what we found was exact 30-degree sections. So between Lurgisol Castle and Devizes Castle, an exact line. Between Avebury, not the stone circle, but the the old monastery, which is now the manor house, down to Amesbury, exactly. And these 30-degree distinctions. I've never talked about this for 10 years in public, so here you're getting a special quick view. But when we look at crop circles and that zodiac, isn't it fascinating? Here we are in Marlborough, and there is the Avebury area. Here is the whole Alton Barnes, Pewsey Vale area. Look at that in a bit more detail, like that. So we've got the Marlborough area here. This is one of Francine's maps from a long time ago. I think she must have hidden it in her attic since then, but anyway, there we are. And this is Pewsey Vale here, and you can see this kind of huge energy area here. I just don't think this is all about chalk and aquifers. I think it's partly about chalk and aquifers, but not entirely. There's more to it. Let's just look, for instance, at the center of the zodiac, this place called Scales Bridge near Rushall. It's very interesting because if we go to the center of the ecliptic, the round zodiac here, the constellation in the very center is called Draco, the dragon. So we'd expect to find a dragon in the middle of this landscape. So somewhere around here, there ought to be a dragon. And indeed there is. They're very rare in Wiltshire. They're common in Somerset, lots of dragons. But in Somerset, dragons are very rare. But between here and Pict Hill, walking up here, is a long lane called Dragon Lane. Here it is. You walk up this Dragon Lane, this is the last part of it, towards Pict Hill. You all know Pict Hill is associated with crop circles. So this is where the spirit of place is kind of connecting and producing this sort of interaction between the old myths and these energies, which you can pick up not knowing anything about crop circles and find in the Wiltshire landscape, and they're relevant to the crop circles. So we go back again and look here, this huge bunch here, just on the ridge above Pewsey Vale. And of course, this relates to this lady. She is the Alton Barnes goddess. She is the person who becomes personified in a rather schematic diagram here, with Knapp Hill here, the umbilicus here, or her tummy button here, but the kind of the cord connecting the born baby from between her thighs here is now, the umbilicus has been laid over into the East Field. This is East Field here. And here we've got Adam's grave and the white barrow here. And these are the breasts. And you get then, of course, Milk Hill. I mean, I've looked up Milk Hill. Do you know what it says in the Wiltshire book about Milk Hill? A lot of cows are up there, you know. Come on. So then you can find this landscape creature with her feet at Martinsell Hill, which we were seeing yesterday at Martinsell, and her knees here, and by Golden Balls Hill, and you're into crop circle territory heavily here, and then you get Knapp Hill, and then finally the two breasts and along the long neck to Tan Hill, which is the head. And from that marvellous parking place just at the bottom of Eastfield, you can see all this very clearly. You've all parked there and looked at crop circles here. The point is that this umbilicus that comes down into the field here, Eastfield, it comes down into a field which has had more crop circles than any other place on this planet since 1980, as far as we know. So right brooding over the field that produces more crop circles than anywhere else is an incredible landscape goddess, a harvest goddess. I just show a picture of Knapp Hill, because this umbilicus is very difficult to see as it comes down. I've drawn it in there, down into Eastfield, but when it snows, you can really see it. Nobody in the archaeology fraternity has any clue what it was there for. But you can see that what it's really reflecting is that crop circles, at least in this field, are sort of divine children of the harvest goddess. This is the spirit of place, of different traditions all coming together. So crop circles aren't isolated. They're no more isolated from aquifers and chalk than they are from these incredible aspects of spirit of place. Now, a quick bit of history. Quick. I wanted to say so much about history, but there isn't time. I love it. So I'm just going to show you a couple of funnies. First of all, the mowing devil. You've all seen pictures of the mowing devil. 1678, the farmer says it must be a mowing devil that's produced these things. And then Mary Lee Harper produced a whole series of wonderful cartoons. Here's the mowing devil with his mowing machine. No job too inexplicable. I love it. I love it. That's the mowing devil. But who is the mowing devil? And I'm going to sort of say a little bit about hoaxing or man-made circles. It's so important, as Bert was hinting yesterday, and I'm so keen on this idea that we don't get upset about man-made circles. Because, let's just have a quick look at them. Well, first of all, get back to the mowing devil. What does he say? Of course, one is always hoping to persuade people that one is only a hoax. Because what he's really saying is, all those stupid people who are making them, I'm behind it all. Note that. Merrily was being very wise in that cartoon. And of course we had Doug and Dave. I remember buying this newspaper in Glastonbury after the symposium when the big breakout came of the men who conned the world, and it was a brilliant piece of publicity that affected the world all over. One single story dealt for many people with crop circles, and it goes rumbling on, all that. And we've had people like Rob Irving, John Lundberg, well-known people writing books on how to do it and all this kind of stuff. Fascinating. They're all a bit peculiar to read, but nonetheless, they were all there. And so, well, you know, it broke the crop circle community. And some people were actually called George, famously, in the crop circle community. I won't say who. How's George taking it? Bent but not broken. I mean, I remember going through that whole period. And people, you know, really kind of devastated by the idea that people were producing crop circles. And yet, if you take a thoughtful academic, and that's William Rawlinson in a paper he wrote from the University of Kent last year, a paper about crop circles as psychoid manifestations. Don't worry too much about the title. The point about this is it's a really good academic paper, and you don't get many academics writing about crop circles. But what he's done is he's gone to all the primary data. He's interviewed people who make crop circles and people who don't make them and believe that they're natural, and he's looked at all the people in between, and he's really found some fascinating things out. Like, for instance, the majority of people who make crop circles acknowledge that there's a mystery, that they can't understand how, when they've had to run away in the night, not finish the circle, it's actually been completed by something else in the morning. That kind of thing he's put down in this paper. So it's a very, very important paper to understand. And I mean, people talk about the esoteric muse, or even the spirit of place. And one of the reasons some of these people go in and make crop circles is because they get a kick out of feeling that kind of energy from the land. So there really isn't much distinction. And I would say, it's a sort of way of summarizing this whole area, that man-made circles, even when poorly executed by our standards of natural, are simply still expressions of a dialogue between people and the spirit of place. They are the hapless puppets of a wider and deeper force, or a mowing devil, if you like. I think that's the way to think about it. Not to see them as the enemy, no one particularly as close friends, perhaps, but not as a kind of threat. It's all part of the same energy, the spirit of place, in my view, anyway. So, you know, it's as important to acknowledge and use these circles that we perhaps think are man-made or whatever, rather like the one Bert showed at the very end of his talk, which was clearly pretty chatty to look at. But it worked perfectly according to the sort of energetic world that he found himself sucked into. So quick few stories about crop circles and consciousness. We've had so much of this that I feel I could dash through this in a few moments, which probably I'm going to do because I don't want to go on too long. But the whole question of our intent becomes absolutely essential in this. I've been talking about the spirit of place as if it's a kind of thing separate from us, but it's not. We're part of it. And the interesting thing is, you're involved in this process, in my view, unconsciously as much as consciously. And it's the unconscious things, the things you've not realized you're thinking about, which sometimes come up in the landscape to reward you. I know so many people who've had a thought about a crop circle, and it's appeared a couple of days later or whatever, that it's making me tired. But I'm going to just take you through, well, this is Busty Taylor, you know, some long-time flyer, comes to this conference occasionally, still very active, marvelous dowser. He flew over a round circle many years ago, and with his companion in the plane, he contemplated what would happen if, I wonder if we could have a kind of Celtic cross out of that circle, and something like this kind of early Celtic cross appeared within half an hour, or a very short time. And that sort of was the first story I heard in this area of consciousness affecting what was going to happen. And then there's this wonderful book, which, you know, if you have a chance to buy it, Karen Douglas as she was, Karen Alexander as she now is, Mrs. Steve Alexander, hugely aware of the whole crop circle thing. But she lived, before she married Steve, in Northamptonshire. And in 1993, she was with a local group that all desperately wanted to have crop circles in Northamptonshire, like we were getting them in Wiltshire, Hampshire, and Sussex at that time. So she began meditating at a lady's house called Beverley to try and get a crop circle, to form one. And these people would go out in the landscape. This is a photograph of the group later on, 10 years on, having a sort of reunion. There was one field called Stepping Hill where they thought there was the most likelihood of them getting a crop circle. So they really went there and intensely worked on it. And in their meditations, they all decided to have a session where they would draw independently what they wanted the crop circle to look like. And they all collected their drawings up and didn't look at each other's drawings, and Karen put them into an envelope. And they went on sweating away and brooding away to try and get a crop circle, and eventually, expecting it to come at Stepping Hill, it arrived. Some beautiful crop circle. They got an aerial photograph. But what was incredible when they all saw it, and Karen realized that in fact, when she took out all the bits of paper from the envelope and joined them together, every single aspect that people had drawn on their bits of paper had appeared in the crop circle. The crop circle had manifested all the different bits and pieces in the packet and put them out on the ground. And she was mind blown by that, and hence had to write a book about it. Not only that, the house where they did all the meditating was here. Down here was where they expected the crop circle to likely come, because it seemed the most likely area. But the crop circle actually appeared at a place called Charlie Knoll, exactly equidistant between the meditating house and the expected place of arrival. Now, this is the kind of thing I think we should be taking into account. This is such a powerful expression of consciousness in terms of the landscape. I won't go on about her particular findings. Just a quickie. Celia, my wife, we've already heard about, the lady who dragged me into the cave. She went home up to Northumberland. She, all her life, for 18 years while we've been together, has every year wanted to have a crop circle, kind of wished for one. It's never happened down here. But she went up to her home county of Alnwick, and the very last crop circle of the year, last year, appeared in a field very close to her sort of native home birthplace, a place called Hawk Hill. Hawks were very much in her life at that time, and it's another example of manifestation in this way. And then finally, well, there's a thought here. This is forward causation. This is where you are looking forward and something happens. But then there's this phenomenon, Crooked Soli. This is my second book of all recommendations to read, Crooked Soli, fantastic book. This is about a crop circle which appeared not very far away between two villages, Crooked Soli and Straight Soli. It appeared here near the Oxfordshire border. It got published in the annual book of the Alexanders. There it is, their photograph. It was just about to be cut as soon as it was photographed. It rained overnight. Nothing in the middle, by the way, for those of you with ropes and things and all that. And it made a perfect equilateral triangle between these three villages. And there were so many strange things, like the famous Doug Bauer. He had his name in a local wood. And Dave, he was Daffy Copse nearby. And there were just masses and masses of synchronicities, but they were all to do with crop circles. And the land, incidentally, up here was actually owned by Tim Carson before he came down to farm in Pewsey Vale. And you needed 72 circles to produce this thing, to produce the little standing bits of corn as Alan Brown and John Michel started to work out. This produced 504 bits of corn that was still sticking up and 792 that should have been sticking up. And these were figures straight out of Plato. They were magic figures that produced all kinds of incredible wisdom. Do you think people are walking around with that Plato before they go out with their planks? Come on. So anyway, these two found all these incredible things out, and how these figures, you were seeing this last night with Bert, 504 miles here, the size of the moon's diameter and the Earth's, radius and the Earth's radius, 7,920 miles. All these things linked together in this incredible way. And finally, there it is in the landscape. All these figures are turning up again, just simply because a crop circle landed here and joined up these two old villages. And so you have a thought. No one before Alan Brown and John Michel previously had recognized the erudite scholarly material in this formation. So where did this unique information originate? And I personally think it originated from Alan Brown and John Michel, because they're the only people who knew about it. And it's projected backward in time, and this is called backward causation, and it's a feature in some kinds of quantum thinking. So I think we're getting that time slip that Bert was talking about yesterday. I'm going to go through these very quickly because I'm quite near the end now. You've seen so much of this already. Jim Lyons took us through, and Gunther Sherman took us through all the fractals and all these kind of mathematical things. I wasn't intending talking about any of these, like pi and the Euler and the incredible things around Crabtree and the messages and the face and the messages from space. And this, you've seen all this before. I didn't intend to talk to it, but just to remind you that this is the kind of material that we're getting. The alien face, the incredible message in binary code. And when you look at the lay of that, how on earth do you work all that out on a dark night? Oh, I don't know. And the message, beware bearers of false gifts. You've read all this. It's all in the books upstairs. I'm not going to go through it. And this one I love, which appeared, I think, in 1999. And people looked at this and thought, what on earth is that? And then somebody recognized that it was, in fact, the representation of the pathways of the total solar eclipses over about 50 years on the Earth's surface. Exactly the same. I mean, you know, come on. How's it happening? Spirit of place or what? And then sometimes, and I'm in my last moments now, it all comes together, doesn't it, in a beautiful way. We can only just contemplate. Oh, sorry, there's a little bit, that bit. This is what I call informational coherence. This is where it all kind of comes together in a sort of tissue of synchronicities. You've seen all these before. I don't have to talk to them. You've seen this right next to West Kennet Longbarrow. Peter Knight mentioned it yesterday. I recognize this immediately, for me, as being the first engraving ever of British Freemasonry. There's the symbol of the Freemasons. These are the constitutions being handed over, 1723, exactly the same pattern of floor and pillars. And within this is encrypted all the triangles of the Platonic solids in an analysis that I've done. And therefore, the whole Western mystery tradition is in this crop circle. The Western mystery tradition. On the 28th of June, 2007. A week later, the yin-yang appears near Bath. That's another mystery tradition. And on the Oxford border, on the same night, busy people, these philosophers dashing around, at Toote Baldon on the Oxfordshire border, another symbol which you won't know what this is, but it's a tesseract. It's a symbol of mystical Judaism, and it represents the totality of the whole universe. There's some more pictures of it. And then, of course, the same night, we had the Om, the great 777, which, of course, is the Vedic tradition. So we'd had the Taoist tradition, the Vedic tradition, the Western mystery tradition, all in 1 week, in just a, university coming out of the... every circle was a symbol of the ineffable, And we were being presented with this in 7 days in 1 year. Spirit of the place. Wow. And finally, just a quick flick through my favorites, because I'd just like to share them with you. My all-time favorite crop circle is this one, the basket, which was cut very, very soon after it appeared. But it is so beautiful. The lay near Bishop's Cannings is just absolutely magical for me, that one. Been lots since. This was a lovely one as well. We had a whole series of sort of fishy kind of goldfishes and goodness knows what a couple of years ago. And this is another one that I like a lot. I'm not saying anything about man-made or not. It's not important. They all come out of this energy, which I've been sharing. And the dragonfly, that was another one. And then the wings of the dragonfly, which show all the veins and everything in this incredible way. Many of you have been in these. And the butterfly, remember that one. And the birds, remember that one? Came in 2 parts 2 or 3 years ago. Absolutely beautiful crop circle. And this one, people are still working on the translation of this. There's a whole institute somewhere, California, I guess, looking at what it all means. But isn't it a beautiful circle? And it's a reminder of how it's there next to the White Horse, which is only 1812. It's not ancient, by the way. It's about 1812 that the White Horse was put up. And of course, then there's the granddaddy or the grandmummy of them all. 409 circles. Even Rob Irving, the famous hoaxer, said, no way could we have done that. Somebody once told me it would take 31 charabancs of people to do it. It was raining all night. Buses to make this thing. And when you go in closer, I mean, it is just magnificent, isn't it? Mind-blowing. And when you get even closer, you realize it was a big job to organize. So I come to the end. Who or what then are the circle makers? Well, I don't really know. I don't have the answers. But I sense, and from hearing the other presentations this day or two, I sense quite accurately, there's a matrix of organized consciousness. I don't know what that means, but I have to say those words. A matrix of organized consciousness. And I'm calling it the spirit of place. I mean, I could call it the cosmoscape, which, of course, the Aborigines have already got it all worked out. And so have the Vedic traditions. We're really catching up here. We're late. It's some kind of coherent totality. It transcends time and space. As Bert was pointing out to us in that incredible presentation last night, it transcends time and space, often enough when you're really in it, to realize that these aren't exceptional moments. This is the reality. It's this which is the reality, the coherent totality. Stop narrowing yourself down to 3.5 dimensions. There are so many more to enjoy. Enjoy them. And I'm suggesting, as we've heard many speakers in the last couple of days saying, it's generated mainly by ourselves, now. Because we have to ask, what is now? And you've heard stories from me about how now can be coming out of a cave and seeing something that's 900 years before you wrote it down on a piece of paper. Just the same kind of way that Bert was telling us about how his photographs got all mixed up last night. So past, present, and even future causal mechanisms. Backward causation, forward causation, sideways causation. Things which are just completely transcendental. And there are certainly interdimensional connections. I haven't said anything about balls of light and other kind of extra-dimensional factors. I mean, I'm avoiding the word alien because I think that's just a sloppy word. I think these are extra-dimensional, interdimensional aspects, which are there in all kinds of ways. And don't forget, you can already do this, because you keep saying it's nothing to do with me. Just as Bert said about that, that opportunity to look in the mirror every morning and change your day, and we don't. Why don't we do it? We should realize that most of you in this room have done some dowsing. Some of you are absolutely excellent dowsers. Dowsers can actually get in contact with anything, anywhere, anytime, anything, anywhere, anytime, future, past, or present. That is totally a quantum experience that you enjoy now. So don't say it's nothing to do with me. You're in it already. And so it's an immanent, that means in your hand, right in your reach, quantum reality. It's a universal entanglement, as I think Jim Lyons was kind of hinting at yesterday. And everything is possible, as they say, seeing is believing. That's the sort of standard scientific view, observation and experiment and replication and all that kind of stuff. But also, I say, believing is seeing. And if you believe, you can create. So, you're probably a circle maker yourself. Thank you. And because you're now conferred officially as the circle maker, you're going to make a circle. This is the plan of St. Paul's Cathedral by Sir Christopher Wren, which never happened. Now, I want you all to settle yourselves, make yourselves nice and comfortable, and Bert has already taught us in his presentation you only need 1 minute. We haven't started the minute yet. I'm going to count it out on my clock here. And I'm very sorry, because Bert also made very clear that in his laboratory, you have to be drinking wine or beer. And unfortunately, the resources of the trust just didn't go to giving you all a glass of wine at this point. But what I want you to do for a full minute is just look at this image, and I haven't started yet. Look at this image, just concentrate on it in a kind of meditative state. You may just want to look at it and then close your mind and keep remembering it. And then know that it is going to become a crop circle within the next 4 weeks in the county of Wiltshire. So we don't want it appearing in Italy or something, because that's what happens if you're sloppy about your terms of reference. It goes all wrong. You've got to be very precise. So 4 weeks, 28 days from now, a crop circle will appear in Wiltshire, and it will relate quite clearly and unequivocally to this next minute. So start the minute. 4, 3, 2, 1, now. Okay, it's up and gone up into the great yen. I'm still trying to sell that book upstairs. I'll be at my table anytime over the lunchtime. This book, by the way, just to let you know, is a Gatekeeper Trust book. All the proceeds go to the Gatekeeper Trust, which is also concerned with the landscape and healing the land, of which, again, I'm a trustee. I've masterminded this book because it tells you how, not about crop circles, it tells you very simply how the spirit of London has risen up for 2012 to generate things like the Queen's Jubilee and the Olympic Games. Why the Olympic Games is where it is and how it's fixed in time. Exactly. It's all in this book. It tells you how to do it. It tells you how to do it. Crop circles is what I've been talking about now. I could have been talking about London manifesting its energy in this kind of way, and that's what's in this book. So if you read this book, a lot of what I've been saying will make sense in the last hour. Thank you very much. This is Britain in the 1950s. We had coal fires. We went to the coal place to cut some coal with our axes and a torch in the dark light. And as we broke the coal, my dad and I, the coal split open, and there was an incredible shaft of gold, like this. Actually, really, like this. This. And my dad said to me, "What do you think that is, Anthony?" And I said, he was incidentally a nuclear physicist, just to say. So my dad said to me, "What do you think that is, Anthony?" Always educational. And I said, "Oh, looks like gold, Dad." He said, "Well, it's not actually gold, it's fool's gold and parites." And there I just put some up for you to remind you what it looks like. It's for sale outside. There's a stall selling it if you badly need this stuff. So I said, "Oh, right, that's interesting." And then he said, "But I want to tell you a story. My dad told me in the 1930s." So this is oral tradition. This is oral tradition now. And my dad and I, in the 1930s, were breaking coal in our coal place in just the same way. And he told me a story as the coal broke open. And he told me about a lady in the United States of America who, just before the turn of the century, had the gold in it. How did it got there? Well, we don't know, except it wasn't 39 million years old. It was 260 to 320 million years old. So we can tell these kind of stories at crop circle conferences, because that's the kind of thing that we're really interested in. So I'm interested in anomalies. So to chase up anomalies, I had to become a psychiatrist, because you're all anomalies, and I wanted to study you. And I wanted to find out what kind of person you... never mind. And I retired and gave all that up over 10 years ago and got back into my real passion, which was landscape. And I'm interested particularly in landscape zodiacs, as some of you know. You've heard me talk about them before. And the idea of, well, what is it that kind of generates a landscape zodiac? How do effigies of the zodiacal signs appear in the countryside? How do they get there? You know, and all this. And I'm now doing academic research into this. And that leads me to the idea that the earth somehow are the things, that we can talk about a song of the earth. And that leads me to the idea of the spirit of place, which is what I'm really going to be looking at today. And that inevitably takes me to crop circles. Dashing through, the earth sings in, you know, many different ways. But just before we look at crop circles for the rest of this talk, I'm going to take you into this interesting subject about spirit of place. And I'm going to start off with a couple of stories. A mum story and a dad story, because I used to be a psychiatrist, which means life histories are very important. So we'll start off. When I was 8, my mum gave me a book, Oxford University Press. It was one of those sort of educational books called The Map That Came to Life. You opened the book up, and it described a brother and a sister going for a walk from where they were staying with a relative, and they were going through the countryside to visit an aunt to have tea in a little village. And as you turned over each page, you saw a different map, and you saw pictures of them, and the map came to life. And I became mad about maps ever afterwards, and I still am. My wife calls me Map Man and all that kind of thing. And but I just put that in because the map that came to life is really a theme in my life. So I share that. Thank you, Mum. She's still alive, nearly 96. And then I have to tell you a story about my dad. Now, at the same time, because I was about 8 then, my dad and I, this was the 1950s, we didn't have central heating. I just want to remind you about the rest, because I'm interested in anomalies. I'm not narrow-minded and just look at crop circles. I want to look at the rest. So let's just have a look at them quickly. Go through them, because I know you're going to hear about some of these things later on. First of all, just to make sure, if you really want to know all about the evidence about crop circles, read Janet Osborne's absolutely brilliant book. It's the thing to give your skeptical neighbor for Christmas who just doesn't believe in it and thinks it's all hoaxing or whatever ridiculous business it is. This is the book, so I get that out of the way. That's the end of the crop circles. Ice circles. I'm just going to show you the images. I'm not going to explain them, but they are just like crop circles. And they're very beautiful. And they tend to be recorded in places where there's lots of ice, which could be tomorrow in this climate. And then there are snow circles. This is from the Netherlands. And they are quite extraordinary. There's no footprints. They're just there. And they have kind of markings. If you drop a piece of snow into this soft snow that's been dug out by some incredible force, it just makes a little mark. There's no footprints, no boards, no planks. And that's the shape of it. Don't ask me why. 60 meters in size. And then essentially broke open a piece of coal in her coal place. And when she broke it open, she found a gold chain in the coal. And when she tried to pull the gold chain from the coal, it was stuck in the coal and wouldn't come out. So that meant that it was actually in the coal. Wow, I said, Dad, being a precocious little boy. I said, how old was the coal? And he made a really good guess because we were cutting Northumbrian coal and he knew that was 39 million years old. So he said to me, 39 million years old. So I said, wow, and that set me into a seed. I'd already become map man, but now I was going to be a hunter of anomalies, strange things. I really wanted to know, how had that gold chain got into the coal? Oh, fast forward. And about 15 years ago, in a marvelous book called Forbidden Archaeology, sort of thing you're not allowed to read, but I've got to read, I found the actual report of Mrs. Culp in Illinois in 1891, who did exactly what my dad's dad through me, and I'm now told you, exactly the same. There was the gold chain. It disappeared out of the family in 1959. It's gone without trace. Nobody knows where it is now. But the point is the coal